working. Okay, and welcome to Happy Hours on April 24th with me, Eileen Cook, who doesn't normally sound like this, but for now, with my cold, you get to have my Lauren Bacall voice. So welcome, Bonnie. Why don't you give me an update on your project?
Oh, an update.
An update since I talked to you last week.
I've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of working on timelines. Have you ever used Aeon Timeline?
No, is that the one
I think
Crystal
Tony
recommends a timeline program?
Yeah, it actually integrates with Scrivener.
Yeah.
So I'm importing the scenes from Scrivener and setting times for them. Because I've been doing it by hand, but I've moved around things so much that I'm getting a little lost. And I was like, okay, how long will it take the eggs to hatch? Because that's kind of my constriction.
Yeah.
And so I've been playing with that. I've actually spent like 5 hours trying to do this timeline, but I think what I need to do is go back and backwards to some of the chapters that I wrote that were veering me off in a complication that would not actually continue my story.
Yeah.
It was going in the wrong direction. It was solving problems before they were even introduced. I basically was eliminating the conflict before it even happened.
That's so efficient of you.
Yes, so I have to go back and rework a chapter, and the parts that were resolving the conflict are conflicts I have to add in later. So that was kind of depressing that I had to go back and delete some stuff. And so there I sit going, I don't want to, and trying to work out in my head, okay, how can I make things worse? I hear your voice, Eileen, saying, how can I make this worse? And
I love that I'm a nag in your head. I always wanted to be that person for someone.
Yeah. So that's basically a lot of thinking and organizing and making things worse, and not actual lot of writing, which it happens.
Well, and that's sometimes part of the process. So, one of your emails to me, which I think I responded to, was about next steps, where I responded in my mind. So
you said, yes, we should have next steps.
We should have next steps. And it's interesting because I was talking to someone else this morning who's just starting the mentorship process, and she's actually starting a brand new project at the same time. So we were spending some time sort of talking about, well, how do you do that? Like, do you just dive in and start writing? Do you outline first? And of course, everybody has their different ways. But for you, I think the interesting question is, what's the most useful thing in the next month for you to spend your time on? And do you feel like you know what that is?
There's a bit of uncertainty, mainly because of work commitments and eye surgery, and I'm getting a lot of traction on my science fiction queries.
Nice.
As well as I've been entering contests with it and getting some indications that it might get some feedback. So that might happen, in which case I might stop. And
you might have a complication.
I might have a complication of my own.
Yeah.
So I've been focusing a lot on the other novel just because of the feedback I've been getting, and it's exciting.
It is exciting. It's a good thing. So one thing that I like to do, and that I encourage other writers to do, is to kind of try and have almost like a monthly business plan, in the same way that you might have, for your day job.
Mm-hmm.
And, now is a good time to be doing it because we're coming to the end of the month. So sort of sitting down and being like, okay, what's on the schedule for May? What is non-negotiable with day job stuff or family stuff? And I think you said surgery was June?
June, yeah.
Okay.
But we have a conference in May and a work retreat.
Yeah.
And so there's only 2 weeks left in May. It's only 1 week left in April. And June, I have to do all the work that I need to do for all of June in the first 13 days so that, I cannot have eyes for a week
for
or two.
potentially some weeks.
Yes.
So,
but I still want to do revisions. It's just, it might be slower.
Yep. So I will give you some options to think about.
Okay. That's good. I like options.
I
I
like
can
options.
pick from options. It's like
so I think, and I'd have to pull it up, and I can't pull it up here without screwing up my carefully constructed desktop at this moment. But I think we have a month left. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Or do we have 2 months left?
One.
So we could put this on hold if you want time to work on those other things and say, okay, I want my final month in July. So that is one option.
Okay.
The other option is I can help you with whatever it is that you are able to kind of complete in this time frame and get that back to you.
Am I there?
You are, but your video's not on, Leslie.
How do I do that? Video. Start video. Okay.
There you are. Hello.
Oh, Eileen, you don't sound good. Cruising. It's the
You're supposed to say
cruising.
she sounds sexy and.
Okay.
I was going for sexy, Leslie.
Smoky, Eileen.
Smoky.
That's it.
Yes, and it wasn't the cruise. This came after I did a school visit. So
Of
I
course.
blame disease-ridden children.
Always.
So, all right. So we were just talking about what Bonnie's going to work on, and my suggestion to people of creating a kind of business plan per month, like just so you don't get discouraged. At least where I know myself, I have kind of a set idea of what I want to be doing. But sometimes when I look ahead at a month, like for example, even me looking at May, which actually for me isn't too bad, but I have 1 week that is out altogether. So I'm in Montreal for book week, and nothing else is going to get done that week because it's 4 to 5 school visits a day and then a library talk at night.
Oh, wow.
And staying in a hotel. So by the time I get back to the hotel, the only thing that happens is I have a glass of wine and go to sleep. So I'm going to be honest about that. And I'm not going to expect any word count to happen in that week. So for you to kind of figure out, where's the best use of your time, given that you have a bunch of day job commitments coming up, and then where's your best use of my time or how I can best support you. And I'm totally flexible with either.
Okay. I will analyze and
You
figure
will
that
ponder
out.
on that. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit tonight about a question that Tony had about passive voice.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's good.
I love that you're thrilled, Leslie. And Bonnie,
Yes, yeah, I am thrilled. And I'll tell you why later.
And Bonnie can rest easy because she's not on the record screen. I think it's only recording me. So she can chew her sandwich while nobody notices.
Oh, good. I can have a glass of wine then.
Oh, by all means. That's why it's called happy hour.
I've had a long day at the White House today, so.
So what I wanted to talk about was the passive voice. And so first, just kind of talking about a little bit about what it is, and I think it'll help because I have examples. So without going all English teacher on everybody, passive voice is a grammatical construction, which is just a really fancy way of saying it's different than active voice, which is more standard English sentence construction. So it has to do with function. So if we say, Mom hugged me, Mom is the subject. She's the actor. The verb hugged is what she's doing. And the receiver or the person who is acted upon is me. So Mom hugged me is active. Now, passive would be, I was hugged by my mom. And if you think of it that way, it's basically you're kind of backwards telling what happened, right? So I kicked the ball is active. The ball was kicked by me is passive. The fish was caught by the seagull, passive. The seagull caught the fish, active.
Can I ask
Now, Of course.
So some of the comments that in this Rev Pit thing that was going on was of this passive voice in that I should have done, I was doing, and they're calling that passive voice, but it's not really passive voice, is it?
So can you give me your full sentence?
Well, I'm assuming she's talking about mind and body, so she's not, but I should have been packing, but.
I should have been packing.
But I hit a roadblock with the contents of my bookcase. No, is that passive? Because I'm using the verb to be as was, should have.
So to be is a good kind of indicator, like where you might be using the passive voice, but it's not always passive.
Okay.
So
I get so confused by what people are calling. I understand when something is being acted on by something that's passive, but I don't get when people are talking about, oh, you used was and should have, and that's passive. And I'm like, oh, I get it.
So it's always for me a case of, is there a way to make something more active?
Mm-hmm.
In your case of the sentence that you used, I wouldn't say that was, because to me that's showing intent. I should have been doing this thing, but instead I was doing this other thing.
Oh, okay.
Right? So you're kind of still taking some of the action there. But if you said, I was feeling sad, I would prefer you say, I felt sad.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, you don't need the was in there.
Right,
Now, even more than I felt sad, I would prefer a more emotional way of showing that, blah, blah, blah. But
that part figured out. But sometimes I do use that. And like this chapter is pretty active, right, Bonnie? But I'm just keep dwelling on Caitlin's critique, and I'm thinking, that's mine. She's talking about mine. It's passive voice. And I'm like, oh, and then when you said you're going to talk about that, I'm like, yes. So now I'll be quiet. I'll have a drink of wine.
I think a passive version of that would have been, the boxes should have been packed by me. Whereas you're saying I should have packed the boxes is still not technically grammarly, if that's a word, passive. I think that the person was more referring to the general voice as opposed to a passive sentence structure.
Okay. Well, I don't think my voice is passive.
No, your voice is definitely not passive.
I am so, I don't know, riddled with paralyzing self-doubt. That's what it is. Okay.
And that's all good. So let's break this into two different things. So it sounds like everybody feels really comfortable with the idea of when the object is being acted upon.
Yes.
The second thing for passive voice is to look for those to be or the was verbs as a way of saying, am I just, I was feeling sad. I felt sad. I don't need the was in there.
Mm-hmm.
So is there, a way to take out that thing and make it more immediate? Sometimes you'll hear people talk about characters being passive in terms of, is the character taking action? And that's something totally separate from grammatical issues. Right. So that's the case of, your character isn't packing, and I want to know, what is it that they're doing? Like, is another character taking all the action in that scene? So that would be a different kind of passive. So sometimes I'll hear people say, you're using passive, but they don't mean the grammatical construction. What they mean is that the character themselves is not acting or reacting, but simply letting things happen to them.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people get confused with this passive voice. It's like two different things. And
Well, and we're not always very clear, and I include myself in that we kind of throw terminology around, and it doesn't necessarily always, construct on the same thing. And so people may not know necessarily what we're talking about. So to me, it's almost more useful, rather than talking about passive voice, but to talk about words that aren't very useful to have in your writing at times.
Okay. Like filter words?
You got it.
Okay.
And I'm
copying those right now. This is good.
So I'm going to make you a nice tidy list, and there's an infographic that I will link to at the end of this podcast. But it's things like one of them is that. So she swore that it would never happen again. She swore it would never happen again. You don't need the that in the sentence. Don't just do a find and replace and delete every that.
No.
That would be unwise. Because sometimes you need the that.
Mm-hmm.
Some others would be that I use a lot is just.
Just, yeah.
Only or really. Like she felt really mad. She, hang on, I'm going to cough and I'm going to turn my mic off for it.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that nice of me? You're welcome. You got to miss that sound. And a lot of these are terms that we use in our own speech patterns. So I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. It's just a little bit more direct and a little bit more clear.
Sometimes can you have just?
Yes.
Like dialogue?
In dialogue. But it's always, for me, it's always a question of, do I need it? And sometimes those kind of hesitation words, like, well, somewhat, kinda, I guess, in dialogue, those work really well because you're kind of showing that the character has that kind of hesitation or maybe lack of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing to be aware of is women tend to use those softening words more often than men. Mm-hmm. And that apparently men are just often more confident.
Apparently.
Apparently, they're just more confident.
Or at least they can fake it better.
Yes. So, those are things where sometimes I think in our writing as female writers or as women authors, we're sometimes including them, and those are things. So, doing a search for words like just, only, really, slightly, almost, seemed. Even is one I use a lot, unfortunately.
Even.
Yeah,
even is one of mine.
Yeah.
Even better. It's just better.
Even though.
It's so better.
It's so much better.
There's another one.
By the way, Leslie, I have to tell you this just because it cracks me up. For you, the light behind you is brighter than the light in front of you. So your face is all blacked out, like it's just your shadow. It's like those media interviews with people who are mafia informants.
We should hear her voice.
That's probably a good thing if you can see what I look like right now.
Yeah, like, we saw you briefly, and then you disappeared.
I got the White House hair going on today. I was a senator. I'm good with the blackout, trust me.
So yeah, you look very mafia informant. So some of the others that I pointed out was perhaps, maybe, simply, somehow, absolutely, basically.
I like absolutely. What's wrong with absolutely?
In dialogue, maybe. Absolutely incredible. Maybe that's your person's.
It can be, but like, for example, she was absolutely certain the killer had run into the woods.
Okay.
She was certain the killer had run into the woods.
Right.
Got it.
If she's certain, she doesn't have to be, you can't be, well, you shouldn't be somewhat. We already talked about that.
What can you use instead of like maybe when someone's trying to figure something out and they're talking to themselves? Well, maybe this is what happened. Oh, what? Maybe not.
That would be reasonable.
Okay.
If they are, thinking through something themselves and they're thinking about maybe, but it's always a question of, are they uncertain or are we just softening our own prose?
Okay.
Or sometimes what we're trying to do is almost add weight to it. So one of the things that I used to say all the time, and I actually got rid of it in my day job because I had a male boss that called me on it, is I used to say actually all the time. Actually, what I think we should do is, actually, what needs to happen is, actually, the problem that you're having, Bonnie, is, as though
it's almost like an apology at the front.
Yes. Right? as if I didn't, it's sort of when someone says, well, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, I was hoping you would. Like,
Is this
I'm
the
not
new truth?
yeah, I'm not sure why you would think I didn't want you to tell me the truth. But actually, again, as a way of kind of taking some of the oomph out of your work. Sometimes now can be one. So like, now stop it versus just stop it. We kind of know you mean right now. In
Not
most
later.
cases. Yeah.
You're cutting going on.
Sort of, kind of, a little. Those are also ones like the cut sort of hurt. Like, well, did it hurt or did it not hurt? It either did or didn't. Very is another one.
Mm-hmm.
This infographic also looked at things around, whether or not you needed certain things, like meet with might just be meet.
Mm-hmm.
This time around could be this time. Most especially.
Most especially.
Most especially.
I haven't heard of that one.
Oh, I've seen that one.
Most especially.
Most especially. Sometimes you catch things like where you'll say something like, it was a safe haven. Can a haven be unsafe?
Nope.
So again, I'm always very leery. Whenever someone says, you can't ever do something, I will always invariably then start trying to search out an example of a time when, of course, you can. So kind of going back with all of these words, should you say you can never use them? Absolutely not. Certainly there are going to be times in dialogue where you want them because that's how the character sounds. There may be times when you want them in the narrative voice because that's the feel you want in the scene. But asking yourself if you need it to be there is a really useful exercise, because I'm going to guess in some cases you won't. Now, I can't remember what both of you do for a day job, but a lot of times in legal writing or in a lot of kind of business writing or technical writing, you'll see people deliberately use the passive voice because that's kind of more correct. Like, again, I come from the legal world. So I used to be writing all sorts of legal reports where what was acted upon and all those kinds of things, like you wanted to be very careful about assigning liability, basically, or blame. So if I say, my car hit Bonnie, that might be assigning, boom. That might be assigning blame, or that might have a problem with it. So I would be more likely to say, Bonnie was struck by my car, because then it doesn't sound quite as much as if I was the one who acted upon her, when that detail of the case may still be in some debate. So if you find that you are, because I would never hit Bonnie on purpose.
That's good.
On purpose. Like, I might run her down, but definitely
might have another mind.
Yes. So that's just where, for people, if you come from a day job where you write a lot of, there's someone there's someone knocking at my door. So hold that thought, talk amongst yourself about your project.
Okay. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. We're being recorded, so we don't want to talk too much. Oh, look, I saw your face briefly. There you go. That's it.
Oh, that's being recorded?
Yes.
Oh dear.
Not everything. Just she's got it on her own. That's active.
Okay.
But
So nobody saw that.
Oh, now it's on you. Can you see how it changes green around
No,
you?
mine's not changing.
Oh.
It's all, I have Eileen's chair. So you got lots done today?
No.
No? You wrote a query?
Nope.
No?
Nope. I worked.
You thought about a query?
I did, but mainly I worked.
Okay, well, working is important. I work too, without
You
a
did.
computer all day, 10
In
and
your
10.
high heels.
My high heels.
Are
With
you
no
having useful discussion?
very. Oh, absolutely. Did we get recorded, Bonnie?
You did. So,
Uh-oh.
uh-oh.
In all Eileen's spare time, she'll check it out.
Yeah, right.
I have lots of spare time, Missy.
Yeah, just gads and bags and
Oodles of it.
lots of
Um,
it. I'm sure those words are on your list.
They
Lots
are.
of
Lots.
it.
Lots. Yes, that's another one.
Lots. That's another one you should add.
I gotta write that down.
Yeah, write that down so it's useful. So one of the things that I suggest is that people keep a list of kind of common filter words.
Mhm.
And if you're not using something like, I know a few people have tried out sort of the pro writing aid and some of the other things that have been mentioned, where it's searching for those kinds of words and it's searching for passive voice. But if you're not using those things, all you have to do is, once your manuscript is done, then you can kind of go back to it and do a find and search for these kinds of words. And then you just have to ask yourself, is it relevant? Or does it need to be changed out? And if you're not sure, leave it the way it is. I then highlight it, because this is usually what I'm doing in kind of that last round when I printed it out. I highlight it, I go back through, I make the changes that I know I want to make, and then I go back through and I see how many are left.
Mhm.
You know what? And if there's, a half a dozen over 300 pages, I'm okay with that.
That's
Yeah.
How
In
many,
the same way, like you'll hear people say all the time, show, don't tell. And that's an awesome piece of writing advice and generally really quite good. The downside of it can be that sometimes what you just need to do is tell and move on. Like you're going to spend too much time trying to show me something when you could just tell me, I felt angry. And maybe you used a stronger word because you want it to, I felt pissed. And then move on versus, I felt my blood boil. Or better yet, my blood boiled.
Yeah.
See what I did
Quite
there?
literally.
Yeah, not literally, God willing. Yeah, I'm not on Mars. But, kind of looking to see, can I put those things in there and make it, just a little bit stronger. So never feel like you have to have a rule.
Got it.
Got it. Questions on filler words or passive voice?
Nope.
How many, let's say you have an 88,000 word document, how many justs would be okay? If your character tends to say, just because.
Like, needs a statistic.
I'm actually cutting right now, and I've already cut 37. I still have like 37 left.
This is how many you're allowed, Leslie.
Oh no, Bonnie, no! Like I'm just.
I love that you think there's a finite number. So for
No, well,
people listening later, if you
Bonnie.
have between 65,000 and 70,000 words, you may have
There's got to be a
4
percent.
justs.
Okay.
Between 75 and 85,000 words, you may have up to 8.
That's what I want to know. Come on now. Get with it.
Again, it's so much hard because, again, how many of those are in dialogue? Because I'll give you a few more in
They're all in
dialogue.
dialogue.
Then I would give you a narration.
Okay, thank you.
But ask yourself, why do you feel so attached to that just? What does that just symbolize for you?
Oh, great. Now I have to do internal thoughts too.
Yes.
It's just the way your character talks.
It is just the way she talks. Damn it.
Or it's just the way she talks. No just required.
No justification.
Yes.
Okay.
So I often think of a lot.
I'll keep working on it. I'm getting. Thank you.
I think a lot of times those filler words get used because it's almost like verbal silence.
It's like an
Yeah. So hang on, I'm going to cough again.
Okay. While she's coughing.
I turned the mic off for you.
Okay.
The other ones that I see a lot, and in fact, I'm going through a manuscript now, is people in conversation or in dialogue, they have the characters say, so, Bonnie, what do you think of what's going on? Well, comma, this is going on. And so they have so's and well's a lot when they're starting off dialogue. So I didn't know what to do. Well, I'm not sure if, like, do you need the so or the well? And the truth is, again, we use it all the time in real conversation. And I think that's why it shows up in our writing, is because that's what we hear. But particularly like with well or so, for me, it's a way if I want to show that the character is hesitating. So instead of saying, I really want to be done with this cold, period. If I say like, well, I really want to be done with this cold, it's almost as if I'm trying to buy time, or I'm not sure what I'm going to say next. So that was a lousy example because it didn't have a lot of oomph to it. But if it was like,
well, I'm really pissed off you hit my car.
yes. Like, you know, if there's something like maybe I'm hesitating, like, so I want to ask someone about whether or not he's lied about something. So instead of saying,
so,
you know, where did you go after work? If I say like, so where did you go after work? Like there's almost a little bit of me working up to maybe asking a question that I'm a little anxious to get the answer to.
It's okay to use it in that circumstance?
Yeah, so I would use it, but it would be that deliberate thing where I'm trying to show that there's a bit of hesitation.
I think I've got one point where she's like trying to tell something really weird to her friend. So she's kind of starting, so this is weird. So in that circumstance,
So
I feel like that works because she wouldn't say this is weird. She's like kind of like, oh, I got to tell her. So I got to watch that I'm not using it when I don't need it. Then I know I had a lot of files before, but I got rid of all those. So
it's cool to be aware of it, because then if we want a very strong character, we would eliminate all those words from their dialogue, and right away they're stronger and more, I don't know, sure of themselves. That's cool.
You know, I often talk about
love techniques.
the reason that we like certain characters is because they say and do the things that we wouldn't say or do. You know, so they're the ones who always have the smart comeback when somebody says something rude. They're the, you know, what I mean, they're strong. And part of that is simply eliminating those kinds of verbal tics that we all tend to use. In the same way, if you do a lot of public speaking, you know, if you go to Toastmasters, they're trying to get you out of the habit of saying, you know, and just pausing before you say something if you're not sure what you want to say next. Getting rid of those kind of questions like, well, actually, technically, hesitations, particularly for women in leadership positions, those are really, you know, you don't picture a Marine sergeant saying, well, actually, you need to run 10 miles. Like, it would be like, you need to run 10 miles, you grunt, right? Like, they're going to cut right to it. So if we're adding those things in, the question is, do they need to be there? And if we're going to use them, are we using them then to their best impact? So are we putting them in when it makes a difference, where it shows that hesitation? A lot of times when I'm going through manuscripts, I'll talk to people about micro cuts. So for example, Bonnie stood up because her phone was ringing. So the question would be, maybe she doesn't need to stand up as she did. Maybe she just needs to stand.
Right.
And that's such a small thing. And people say like, well, does it matter if you say Bonnie stood up to answer the phone or Bonnie stood to answer the phone? And no, neither one is incorrect, but it's a small, tiny cut. And if this is a fast action scene where I'm trying to show a lot happening, or I'm wanting people to read much more quickly through that scene. Do you like my voice just cracked on that like a 13-year-old boy? Cutting out even something small like up can just tighten everything up little by little. And again, sometimes I'll have people say like, well, it's just such a small little, like you're taking one word out. But if you take one word out, out of every page,
100 ups.
it makes the difference. And often you can get rid of a lot of them, and it will just tighten up your prose fairly significantly. So that is why it's useful to do. Passive voice just is easier to read. It's clear what's happening. If we're talking passive around the character being passive, it's that the problem with that is we don't feel like the main character has agency. That's the term you'll sometimes use. That they're not the ones leading the story. The story is happening to them. And that's not nearly as exciting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Questions, comments?
Nope.
All right, so I have one more thing to bring up this evening. And the call will go out to people who are listening to this later as well. I'm going to be doing an interview with my agent, Barbara Powell, which we will be recording as a masterclass for all of you guys.
Oh, great.
So she has agreed to answer any and all questions.
Wow.
Or at least whatever we can get through in the time period that she's allotted. So I shouldn't say any and all. We may run out. Are there things that you would like to know? So to give you some background, Barbara's my agent, so I feel pretty comfortable asking her most things. She's with the New York agency called the Irene Goodman Agency. She represents several New York Times bestsellers, of which I plan to be one of these days. And, she's a well-established agent. She does a regular column for Writer's Digest. So she's quite useful and helpful in that way, in addition to being rather witty and droll. So anything you'd like to know from agents?
I have a question. When they've requested a full, do they just read until they lose interest, or do they ever read the entire thing?
Okay.
Like if they think, wow, this is a really exciting premise, and oh, I didn't really like this bit, would they keep reading if something, or would they just stop because something pulled them out so much they would just stop?
So I'm going to give you a complicated answer on behalf of Barbara, but I will ask her that as well.
Well, you don't have to ask her if you know. That's good.
Well, I want to give, because I can hear her in my head being like, oh, so now you think you're an agent, do you? And I'm like, yes, I sort of feel like I am.
I have you in my head.
But I'm kind of just speaking in terms of being fortunate enough to know several agents and have several who are friends. So part of that is going to depend.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that will depend on is what is their current workload.
Right.
So if they are swamped and they have 7 other fulls that they've promised to read and they're behind on those, and 3 of their clients are turning in manuscripts, if they find themselves pulled out, they're probably just going to stop. If they have a little bit of leeway, they might keep reading because they'll want to see, like, is this something that gets turned around?
Mm-hmm.
I think the other time that they keep reading is if they see something in the writing. So they've identified what they think the problem is.
And they can.
So they're thinking like, okay, let's see if that does in fact continue to be the problem, because then maybe I'm going to make a revise and resubmit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for people who haven't heard that term, welcome to a fresh new level of hell in the query process. So you send off a query, and if someone requests the full, of course, what you're hoping is that they're going to call you and say, Bonnie, you are a genius. We love it. You are a goddess among writers. We have already sold this for $5 million. Please let me represent you. But that may not always be the case. Sometimes they will come back.
Not always.
Not always. Sometimes they will say, I'm offering you representation, but that representation is dependent on if you're open to making certain changes. And I have seen that happen, but they know that they're in.
Mhm.
But they'll say, for example, at the very end of it, I think the book needs, she can't die at the end of the book, for
Mhm.
example. So, you know, if you're willing to make that change, then I'd be willing to take on that book. Then the ball is in your court to make that decision about, is that a change that you feel comfortable making or not?
Right.
Another option is they can come back to you and say, I like your book, I like the premise, but these are some of the changes I'd like to see. I'm open to you revising and then resubmitting. So they are not making you a formal offer of representation, but they are saying there's something there. I'd like to see what you might do with it.
Mhm.
And again, then that's back onto you. You do not have to revise and resubmit. It's just one person's opinion. Again, if you're like, you know, I hear the changes they're suggesting, but I don't want those changes, then you don't have to take it.
Mhm.
But you may choose to do that. And if you revise and resubmit, and then they say, now I love it, and I desperately want to be your agent, you don't have to take them as your agent.
Do they ever use that? Desperately want to be your agent?
Maybe. They're going to use it for you guys. I feel it. But
Oh,
you're not, but certainly if an agent is spending time with you and you're going back and forth on revisions
And they're helping you.
and they're helping you, and then you don't sign with them because agent number 2 offered you and you're like, oh, well, now they like it and it's all revised and changed. So I want to go with them because they're a bigger agent or something like that. Just know that you've burned that bridge
Mhm.
with the agent that did help you, because they don't have to do that.
Do they give you input if they're seeking a revision?
Usually they will. Sometimes I've seen some revise and resubmits that are like full edit letters. They might be 4 or 5 pages, single spaced, with suggestions. I've seen some people say, let's have a phone call and talk about it and kind of brainstorm options. And I've also seen things like, the tension's just not holding me.
Mm.
Usually if they're saying, if you're willing to revise, I'd take another look. If they're vague, you can usually come back with an email and say, when you say the pacing isn't working, can you give me a couple points in the manuscript in particular? Or do you think something like X, Y, or Z would help?
Okay.
That can work.
Okay. That's good. Don't be afraid to get input.
Yes.
Good.
The thing to remember with agents is agents make money when you make money.
Yeah.
So if they are doing revise and resubmit letters with you, you're not making any money. They're not making any money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it truly is an investment on their part of their time
Mm-hmm.
to try and help you out. It's a big ask and it's a big favor that they're doing for you.
Okay. That's cool.
Doesn't mean you have to take it. It just means that it is a favor.
Too much
They are
talking for you, huh?
apparently there's like only so much my voice has, and then it's like,
Yeah.
and I'm done.
And I'm yeah.
So they, you know, certainly if someone is taking the time to do a revise and resubmit, they're interested in your writing, they're interested in your story. They're taking time out of stuff they could be doing that would earn them money
Mm-hmm.
because they think there's some potential there. Other things you'd like to know, like, is there anything that you have questions about the agent relationship or what they do or how it works?
Well, I kind of was wondering about I know when you send queries, it can take anywhere from 2 seconds to 8 months or longer before you get a response. And that's because they have huge query filled inboxes and they have to do that kind of on their, when they're not busy with other stuff. But when they actually ask for manuscripts, is there, I just am wondering what agents typically do. Is that something they allocate to their weekend projects, or is it something that they is part of their daily, oh, I'll check out one manuscript this week? And obviously everyone's going to be different, but I'd be curious what her process is.
Yeah. We can definitely find that out for you. And I do know they are different, and I do know that people have different ways. I know some have spreadsheets, and they're constantly tracking what they've asked for. Because again, of course, it's that way life always is. They might go 3 months and nothing appeals to them. And then they might go through one query stack and end up asking for like 3 or 4 fulls because it just happens to be like all of a sudden the query gods rain down on them the most beautiful stuff.
I gave them just what they wanted.
Yeah, and now it's like, now there's all these things that I want. And so that then ends up taking up more of their time. So sometimes things can happen in that unfortunate way where you might have plans around like, I'm going to read 1 full request every week on Wednesday afternoons, but it may not work out to structure that way. But we will find out Barbara's end of things. Other things you deeply want to know? Anything about how they spend their day, their time, your hard-earned money?
Well, I know that they kind of have to pitch your book to the publishers, so they kind of make up their own query letters or use yours. I don't know what's the process. How do they come up with that? Do they just happen to know what's most exciting about your novel that you can't figure out when you're doing it?
We will ask Barbara that.
Really good at.
One is they are good at that.
Yeah.
They are good at that. The other thing to keep in mind that's sometimes the missing link between us as the writer and the publisher is they often know these editors. They know them very well.
My question, yeah. They have these relationships. So they have an idea kind of what is looking for what and how many would they pitch at a time? Do they do like queries out in batches or?
Usually they are. Hang on, I'm writing your questions down as well, so I'm sure to ask her.
We're just full of questions.
Yeah, which is good because I have a lot of time to fill with her. So I have some questions already, but I know I have some to ask. Yeah, I mean, these are people they have relationships with. These are people that they're selling projects to on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes a pitch might be as simple as picking up the phone and saying, hey, Susan, remember we were talking yesterday about how you would kill for a mermaid story that had hot sex scenes? Hell, I got the book for you, right? And it'll be like, yeah, great, send it all up. So it may be a very informal kind of thing. And then they may also do up more of a formal pitch letter. And it definitely is, this is their job, is selling books. Mm-hmm. Our job is writing books. So I don't think we're always as good at the selling part. Mm-hmm. So they're often very good at kind of distilling down what is the critical thing. Or they might know if there are kind of hot buzzwords happening at the moment that they want to use those particular terms, or a comparable that they might say, again, something that may not even be out yet, but that all of publishing is talking about. Leslie, you had a question, or did we not answer it? Or did we?
I wondered what her feelings would be about a new hungry agent that's building their list that might not have all those connections in the editorial world, as opposed to a very, very busy, well-established agent that knows everybody,
Well, she's established, so she's going to say that she's the best.
Yeah, she's your agent.
Yeah, and I would love her that.
Cons to both, I would imagine, right?
There is. I mean, I certainly can say my very first agent that I worked with was a new baby agent. And I definitely think part of the reason that she signed with me was she did not have a query box full of 100 queries a day. She was just getting them in. Mm-hmm. What I would say from the writer's perspective is if it is a new baby agent, you want one that's at an established agency. Yeah. Because while she may not have any contacts, someone down the hall is going to have those contacts.
So they share that information and they work together, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
so they're having those kind of conversations where baby agents should be going down the hall and saying, hey, Barbara, I've got this great book on etc. Who do you think might be interested? And she might be like, here's some places to go. Or she might be like, you know what? I'm having coffee next week already with so-and-so. Why don't you come with me?
So you've got that name behind you.
So that might be that person's way in. So quite often the way baby agents start, how baby agents are born, when a mommy agent and a daddy agent love each other very much.
By Eileen Cook.
Yeah. Very, very, very much.
Actually, they love each other.
Yeah, actually how they're made. So quite often the way that agents start in the business is they start as an assistant in the agency.
Right.
And I can't think of her name at the moment, and I feel terrible about it, but she did just start, so it's not terrible. But there's a new person at the Irene Goodman agency, and she is the assistant to several of the agents. So like when I have a call about like, hey, where's my check? I call her first. And she's like, oh, I'll get it. It should have gone out in yesterday's mail. Let me make sure, blah, blah, blah. But she's often going through things. But she may be going through some of the query piles for agents and flagging things. So sometimes they'll start by saying, here's a project that I really find interesting. And the agent is kind of almost shadowing and helping them figure out, how do you know if a project's good, that kind of way. So again, they're getting that mentorship kind of right from the get-go, which is really good and helpful for them. And then you'll sort of see them start taking on their own clients. Yeah. So that's how that'll work. Now Bonnie's coughing silently. It's not just me.
Actually, you brought up a good point that is kind of a curious thing for me.
Okay.
What is the process for getting paid? You've got your book deal. The publisher is sending the book out. How do you get paid? The money goes through.
I'm gonna answer this one because by Joe, I know the answer to this.
Yay!
Ooh, puppy. Puppy participation in the thing. So the way you get paid. So you get the wonderful phone call. Bonnie, this is your agent Eileen. We have an offer from Simon & Schuster for $100,000.
Even better.
Right?
I get what, 10?
No, you get the 100,000. The offer is for
okay.
you. So, yay, you're getting, $100,000. So, now how is that going to work? So, one, there's going to be some negotiation back and forth, but we're going to say the offer stays at $100,000. Then part of that negotiation, hang on, is, that was my phone, was a little party. Part of that negotiation is how is the publisher going to pay that out? But it's most commonly done in thirds. So you get the first 50% on signing of the contract. So the publisher is going to send you a big, long, fancy contract. You're going to sign it. You're going to sign that sucker. You're going to send it back. And then they issue a check to you. And they do that one of two ways. And again, you can talk about with your agent which way they do this. They either send that check to your agent cashes it, deducts their 15%, and sends you the rest. Or the publisher splits it at their part. So they send 15% to your agent and the rest of it directly to you. It's just how they do the accounting. It'll be in your contract with the agent that if they receive money, they have to send it out to you within usually 10 to 15 business days. Okay. So they can't cash the check and be like,
yeah, in 3 months.
Yeah. Oh, did I not send that? Let me get that out.
You have to ask me 3 times.
Yeah. They're contractually obligated to get that out to you quickly. Okay. But sometimes the publisher will just split it at the publishing site and they send it out to you. So then you're going to get your next payment, the next 25%, on which they call DNA payment, which is you have delivered your manuscript and they have accepted it. So you got 50% upon when you signed it. Then you got an editorial letter from your editor at the publishing house with changes.
Which
you made those changes,
off, right?
Right? You made all of those changes. You sent them back. Maybe you went back and forth with your editor, but eventually you got to a point where your editor said, bang, this is it. This is our manuscript. That's the DNA. And they then issue another 25%. So that comes to you. And then your final 20% usually comes on publication date. Now, if you have a smaller advance, let's say you get $5,000, oftentimes what they'll try and negotiate is that there's just 2 payments. So there's on signing and then on delivery. Like, why drag this out? We're not talking big sums of money. The bigger your advance, the more the publisher wants to divide it up. And in all honesty, probably the more you want to divide it up for tax purposes too.
Yeah, it's good for cash flow.
Yeah, like, because then you're not getting all in one tax year. It's probably going to be divided between 2 tax years. So that can be helpful for you as well. So that's how getting paid works.
Okay, so now your book is out there.
Yeah.
And you've earned out your advance.
Well, you're just flying along, aren't you, Bonnie?
Yes, of course she is.
About a week.
Yeah. All right. So you've earned out your advance. So just in case people don't know what that means is,
Okay.
and we're going to keep the math really simple for Eileen because she's on over-the-counter cold medication. So Bonnie sold her book for $100,000 and her royalty rate is $1 per book. So Bonnie is going to have to sell 100,000 books before she earns out. Right? So that's how that's going to work. So we're going to assume that Bonnie has already sold 100,000 books. At that point, why not?
Yeah.
Accounting is usually happening twice a year, and it depends on your publishing house, but June and December seem to be kind of the most common. So you'll get a statement in June that will say you sold 150,000 books. So minus 100,000 for your earn out leaves $50,000 and attached is a check for that amount. But you're usually only getting royalty statements twice a year.
Okay.
So you're only getting paid. You're not going to get like a check every month. Like this month I sold 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is how it would work if you're indie published with things like Amazon,
Right.
Those kinds of things. In those cases, you're being paid.
Okay.
monthly.
So that's why people say that they like the Amazon indie type model, is because it's a more steady income than twice a year.
Yes.
Pros and cons.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely pros and cons. Like, it's great if you're earning, again, lots of money. It's coming in every month. It's divided up nice and easy. But it also can be annoying if you're earning $1.95 from Amazon.
Yeah.
And you're tracking that. So
I got $1.95 this month.
Yeah.
Yes.
It can sometimes be nice to group those together.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
So if you think of any other questions that you would like to ask, or anyone who's listening to this podcast later, I'm going to be collecting those over the next 2 or 3 weeks before I set up this conversation with Barbara. So if there's anything you think you'd like to know, then let me know, and I will be creating a master list and having a in-depth conversation with her.
Okay. I really enjoy her column, Funny You Should Ask.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm going to just freely admit she's hysterically funny, and she makes me laugh all the time.
That's great. A good combination between the two of you.
Oh yeah, we have a very inappropriate and a funny time together.
So how did you, and why, quick before you run away on us, part with your first agent?
It was multiple reasons. The biggest and primary reason was she was phasing out of the business.
Okay.
So she was trying to decide if she wanted to leave the business, but I was having the sense that her heart wasn't in it anymore. So someone who had been very responsive and on things was suddenly, things were taking a lot longer. She wasn't being as proactive. So she used to be really like, what do you think if we did this and we should go after that and let's ask your publisher for this? And suddenly it was like
silence.
So I actually had a conversation with her where I said, like, of course, because we're writers, it's all about us. Like, is it me? Like, you don't like me? Did I do something? And that's when she was like, it's not you. She was pregnant at the time. They were making the big decision and they decided to leave New York, and she decided she wanted to be a mom.
Okay. Well, that made it easy for you, though. That was an easier way to part, right?
Yes. And I still have tons of affection for her. And she's still, for me, the first person who liked my writing that I wasn't sleeping with or related to.
That believed in you, right?
Yeah, who believed in me. And that was
something. That's huge.
yeah, like that was, and I forever will be grateful for that. But I have no doubt, like Barbara's been a fantastic addition to my career and has really pushed kind of my writing and my success rate with stuff. And that's definitely her. She's an amazing agent.
Cool.
So,
Thank you.
all right. So take care, everyone. And I will see you next Tuesday morning if anyone's free.
Better.
All right.
Bye.